Kang the Conqueror was never defeated. Kang the Conqueror is framed as a villain who lost early, trapped in the quantum realm, killed by Ant-Man, and replaced by louder, more dangerous variants. That framing is convenient. It also ignores how Kang actually operates. Kang doesn't fight wars to win battles, he fights them to control outcomes. The Kang we see in Quantumania isn't a rogue exile trying to claw his way back. He's a survivor of a multiversal conflict that already happened. His exile wasn't punishment, it was containment. The film shows Kang stranded in a realm that exists outside normal time. That matters. The quantum realm doesn't obey linear causality. Events don't flow forward. They loop, compress, and distort. A Kang trapped there isn't removed from the multiverse. He's positioned beneath it. Kang's technology still functions. His knowledge remains intact. He understands incursions, timelines, and multiversal collapse better than any other character introduced so far. And most importantly, he knows what happens when infinite versions of himself exist simultaneously. That's why the Council of Kangs exists. They aren't preparing to invade, they're stabilizing territory. Each variant occupies a timeline that already survived multiversal war. The Council doesn't represent expansion, it represents damage control. Kang's defeat in the quantum realm lines up too cleanly with the TVA's collapse and the sudden explosion of uncontrolled branches. Once He Who Remains dies, time fractures. Once Kang is neutralized, chaos accelerates. Those events aren't coincidences, they're linked. If Kang truly lost, incursions would slow down. Instead, they escalate. That implies Kang's presence, even in exile, was acting as a pressure valve. A single dominant Kang suppressing worse outcomes. Removing him didn't save the multiverse, it destabilized it. Which raises the real question. What if the Kang we saw die wasn't the threat? What if he was the last version still trying to prevent total collapse? And if that's true, then the Council of Kangs isn't the beginning of a war. It's what shows up after the war has already been lost. Loki didn't save the multiverse. He replaced it with something worse. Loki is framed as the solution. The character who stepped into chaos, seized control of time, and prevented infinite destruction. But what Loki actually did wasn't restoration. It was substitution. At the end of Loki Season 2, Loki destroys the concept of the sacred timeline and replaces it with himself. He doesn't repair reality. He becomes the structure holding it together. That distinction matters. The sacred timeline was artificial, but it was stable. It functioned because the TVA enforced it ruthlessly. Loki's new system doesn't rely on enforcement. It relies on endurance. Every branching timeline now survives because Loki actively sustains it. Which means the multiverse is no longer governed by rules. It's governed by a single entity. Loki isn't managing time. He's bearing it. The scene of Loki holding infinite timelines isn't symbolic. It's literal. Each branch draws energy, attention, and continuity from him. That creates a dependency the multiverse has never had before. If the sacred timeline failed, another TVA could be built. Another system could replace it. But if Loki fails, there is no fallback, no authority, no reset. That makes the multiverse more fragile than it's ever been. There's also the issue of stagnation. Time under Loki doesn't flow naturally, it's preserved. Branches grow, but they don't resolve. Conflicts don't collapse into singular outcomes. They remain suspended. That increases the likelihood of contradictions, overlaps, and incursions. In other words, Loki didn't prevent multiversal war, he postponed it. And when that war comes, it won't be fought between Kangs or timelines. It will be fought against the system Loki himself has become. Doctor Strange keeps breaking multiverse rules, and he knows it. Doctor Strange is positioned as the MCU's safeguard, the one who understands the rules of reality and enforces them when others go too far. The problem is, Strange violates those rules more than anyone else, and he does it knowingly. In Infinity War, Strange views over 14 million futures and chooses the one path where they win. That act alone establishes a dangerous precedent. He isn't reacting to events, he's selecting outcomes. From that point on, time stops being something that happens. It becomes something curated. Then comes No Way Home. Strange casts a spell affecting the entire multiverse to fix a personal problem, not a cosmic threat. Not an incursion, a memory issue. The spell fails, not because of outside interference, but because it was never contained properly in the first place. That failure drags in variants who are already dead in their own timelines, people who shouldn't exist anymore. And when Strange fixes it, he doesn't erase the damage. He seals it. That distinction matters. Sealing a breach doesn't restore stability, it just hides the fracture. In Multiverse of Madness, Strange goes further. He openly acknowledges incursions, then proceeds to risk them anyway. He dreamwalks. He possesses a corpse. He uses forbidden magic while knowing exactly what it costs. Other characters cross lines out of desperation. Strange does it out of confidence. He believes he's the only one capable of making these decisions. That belief is what makes him dangerous. Every time Strange breaks a rule and survives, it reinforces the idea that consequences are manageable. They aren't. The multiverse doesn't punish him immediately, it accumulates damage quietly, and Strange keeps adding to it, convinced that he can fix anything later, which leads to the obvious conclusion. Doctor Strange isn't the MCU's guardian, he's its most repeat offender. And when the multiverse finally collapses, it won't be because someone didn't know the rules. It will be because Strange kept choosing to ignore them. Wanda Maximoff broke the multiverse in a way that cannot be fixed. Wanda Maximoff is treated like a cautionary tale, a powerful character who lost control, caused damage, and paid the price. That interpretation assumes the multiverse functions like a system that can reset. Wanda's actions suggest it doesn't. No Infinity Stones, no artifacts, no multiversal technology, just will. That alone places her outside the normal rules of the MCU. When she acquires the Darkhold, that power stops being local. Dreamwalking allows Wanda to project her consciousness into alternate versions of herself, hijacking realities that already exist. And every time she does it, the Darkhold confirms the same thing. Those universes are damaged in the process. The film treats this damage as collateral, but multiverse logic says otherwise. Dreamwalking doesn't just borrow another Wanda's body. It forces two versions of the same being to occupy a single reality. That violates the core principle that keeps timelines stable: separation. The Darkhold calls this unnatural. The Illuminati describe it as fatal to universes. And yet, Wanda does it repeatedly. Each jump creates stress fractures. Each fracture increases the probability of an incursion. And unlike technology-based breaches, Wanda's power doesn't leave behind tools that can be shut down. There's no machine to destroy, no portal to close. Even her apparent death doesn't solve the problem. The Darkhold is destroyed in every universe, but the damage already caused doesn't reverse. Incursions don't undo themselves. They compound. Wanda didn't open the multiverse. She weakened its load-bearing structure. That makes her different from every other multiversal threat. Kang manipulates timelines from outside. Strange violates rules but follows limits. Wanda ignores limits entirely. She forces reality to accommodate her, which leads to the unsettling implication. If the multiverse is collapsing, it isn't because of war or conquest. It's because Wanda proved reality could be rewritten, and the universe never learned how to recover from that. And if one person could do that once, there's nothing stopping it from happening again. Tony Stark never stopped exciting. He just stopped mattering to one timeline. Tony Stark's death is treated as permanent, the emotional cornerstone of the MCU's first saga. But the multiverse makes that finality local, not universal. Tony didn't disappear, he became fragmented. Across the multiverse, Stark variants exist in timelines that never led to Endgame. Timelines where he never snapped, timelines where he survived. Timelines where he became something else entirely. The MCU avoids showing them directly, but it keeps implying their presence. Superior Iron Man doesn't appear on screen, but his absence is intentional. The MCU doesn't reveal dangerous variants early. It delays them until the system can no longer absorb the shock. Technology is where Stark's multiversal footprint becomes obvious. Iron Man-level innovation continues after his death at a pace that shouldn't be possible without him. Armor systems evolve. AI becomes more autonomous. Nanotech grows more adaptive. These advances don't come from imitation. They come from inheritance. Stark didn't just build machines. He built frameworks that other versions of himself already perfected elsewhere. The multiverse allows information bleed, not direct travel, but conceptual overlap. Ideas echo across timelines when realities weaken. That's why Stark-style solutions keep appearing even when Stark himself is gone. Which suggests something else. Tony Stark may not be returning as a person, but his variants may already be influencing the Prime timeline. If one of those variants decides to intervene directly, it wouldn't look like resurrection. It would look like correction. A Stark who sees the multiverse collapsing and chooses efficiency over morality. And that version wouldn't sacrifice himself. He would stabilize reality at any cost. If the MCU needs a final authority figure to challenge gods, sorcerers, and Kangs alike, it doesn't need to revive Tony Stark. It just needs to introduce the one version who never learned to stop. And once that happens, the multiverse won't be debating survival anymore. It will be negotiating terms. Steve Rogers was never supposed to come back. Steve Rogers' ending is treated as peaceful, a reward for sacrifice, a closed loop where everything makes sense. But that ending only works if time travel in the MCU follows rules it never actually confirms. Steve doesn't return from the past. He stays there. That distinction breaks everything. When Steve goes back to return the Infinity Stones, he doesn't just pass through history, he creates a new branch. The Ancient One explains this clearly: changing the past creates alternate timelines. There is no mechanism shown that allows Steve to live a full life in the past and still return to the Prime timeline naturally. Yet, he does, which means one of two things happened. Either Steve illegally crossed timelines without detection, or someone allowed it. The TVA should have intervened immediately. A super soldier living decades off script is exactly the kind of variance they erase. But they don't, because Steve Rogers isn't a mistake. He's a fixed outcome. Steve's presence in the past stabilizes certain timelines instead of destabilizing them. His moral consistency acts like an anchor. Wherever he exists, events converge toward familiar outcomes. Wars still end. Power stays contained. Extremes are delayed. That makes Steve unique. Unlike Wanda, Strange, or Kang, Steve doesn't bend reality. Reality bends around him, which explains why he's allowed to exist off the timeline. But that creates a more unsettling implication. If Steve can stabilize timelines simply by existing in them, then his removal from the Prime timeline weakens it. The world loses its moral anchor. Leadership fragments. Decisions skew toward efficiency instead of restraint. Steve didn't retire, he was repositioned. Somewhere in the multiverse, there's a timeline where Steve Rogers is still active, not as Captain America, but as a silent stabilizer. And if the multiverse reaches a point where force and intelligence both fail, that's the version of Steve that gets called back. Not to fight, but to reset what everyone else broke.